Yeah, my name is Steve McCurry. Most of my photography has been in Asia over the past 30 years. I spend about a half the year or maybe even 2/3 of the year traveling in these different places. I first went to India in 1978. The trip was originally supposed to only be 6 weeks, but I ended up spending over 2 years on that one trip. I didn't come home for 2 years. And I was just fascinated with the colors and the culture and the people and the geography and the monsoon and how sort of different everything was from what I was used to growing up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Did you stay in one place in India that 2 years, or did you travel
I
constantly?
traveled constantly. I went all over India, Nepal. I went to Pakistan, went into Afghanistan, spent a little bit of time in Thailand. But I was just, the contrast between sort of rich and poor and old and new, and people were still living in what seemed to be biblical times, ancient times. They were living the way probably Europeans lived, 1,000 years ago. I mean, in certain pockets, not certainly. There's a lot of modern areas which are every bit as cosmopolitan as New York or London. But so I was the range of culture there, Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and the Sikhs and the Parsis, Christians, Muslims. It was just a whole gamut of religions.
What were you looking for something in particular, or were you on a journey of self-discovery? Did you have an assignment?
I was not really any assignments. I was just sort of wandering around on my own, looking for interesting stories, interesting places, interesting situations. I guess primarily looking for story possibilities, and traveled all over Rajasthan and made many treks in Nepal. So I really got a good sort of range of tropical and desert and high altitude, and it was one of my favorite times traveling around like that.
What did you do for money?
Well, I had saved some money working for the newspaper back in 2 or 3 years before I went on the trip. So I used that money to travel with, and it lasted for almost 2 years. I lived in very sort of cheap hotels and took the bus, and I was just kind of living on a shoestring, and but it was all good, and it was a pleasure to travel around in that kind of way.
And then, kind of a story found you in the form of Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Yeah, I kind of just by chance wandered into Pakistan from India, and while I was up in the north in Pakistan, I met some Afghan refugees who invited me to go into their country and see what was happening. What was happening was there was a kind of a civil war going on between these tribesmen and the central government, and the government was destroying their villages and driving them out as refugees into neighboring Pakistan. So it was a very dramatic, very sort of intense situation with, thousands of refugees kind of streaming over the border. I made a trip. I went in for Afghanistan for like a month, and then came back and sent the pictures back to back home, and they got used by the New York Times and a few other magazines. But the real changing point came when the Russians invaded, and then suddenly it became this huge international story, and everybody was clamoring for pictures, and so it was a great kind of time for me because I had a lot of experience there, I had a lot of pictures, and people were continually sort of using my photographs. And as a result, I got an assignment from National Geographic, which took me back to Pakistan, and I spent the next 7 months working on that story for National Geographic.
Mm-hmm. And that's when you came across the famous photograph of the Afghan?
No, that was 3 or 4 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I did a number of assignments. I worked I did 2 stories in Pakistan, and then I went to work in Beirut in Lebanon, and then from there went to back to India to work on a story on the monsoon and the train journey across India, which became, very successful stories. But then I got this assignment to do a piece on the Afghan-Pakistan border. That's when I came across the Afghan refugee girl, mm-hmm. and photographed her, and she ended up on the cover of the June 1985 issue. And of course, it was a wild success, and people all over the world were inquiring about who she was and how they could help her and adopt her or marry her. It was all sorts of inquiries of people, just overwhelming interest in who this little girl was.
Did you know at the time that this was going to be a really successful photograph when you took it, or were you surprised?
Yeah, there was really no way of knowing how successful the picture was going to be. I had taken thousands of portraits, and you never quite know which ones are going to be successful and which ones won't. So it was a surprise. I was kind of astonished at what the outpouring of interest was for that picture.
Why do you think she captured that kind of intense interest?
I think the interest with that photo had to do with a couple things. One is that she was a very pretty little girl. She was about 12, actually, and she had these really kind of beautiful lips, and she had these really kind of haunted eyes. So it was kind of a combination of this beauty, but yet there was this kind of raw kind of feeling that something was not quite right. She seemed a bit troubled, and she also it was clear that she was poor because her shawl was ripped, and I think she just captured people's imagination, and I know a lot of people, based on that picture, went to volunteer in the refugee camps in Pakistan. They were kind of moved to go and help out, which was a great thing,
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So through that picture, you had really a direct impact for benefit for people.
Yeah, there was a big benefit then, and then when we found her in 2002, they started this nonprofit fund for Afghan girls' education, and they raised about $1.5 million for that fund to allow girls to be educated in Afghanistan. So it was like a really big deal, the fact that she was